So I was given advice the other day that if I was nervous before I gave my talk, I should just tell you guys that I'm nervous. Because I'll get a reaction like this. Everyone understands what it's like to be on stage and to be afraid of messing up in front of an audience. So, I'm nervous. Like Craig said, this is my first time speaking publicly. Or I guess the panel that I did a few days ago was the first time, but this is my first time by myself up here giving a talk. I'm nervous. I'm also excited because a year ago, I could not have dreamt that this is where I would be today. You know, standing here talking to you guys about my story and talking about philosophy. Like Craig said in his intro, last year when I went to TOSCon, I did not know anything about philosophy or the studying of ideas. I had just kind of completed my journey of walking away from the left, and I knew that I wasn't woke progressive. I also knew that I wasn't really a conservative, but I didn't know what else was out there. Like, was there a third option? Was there something else that I could kind of grab onto and help make the world make sense? And so when I came to TOSCon, I heard all of these speakers and met a bunch of amazing people with great ideas, and I learned a lot. As much as I learned from the people that I met at TOSCon, I think a lot of people also, and maybe this is giving myself a little bit too much credit, but I think a lot of them learned from me as well. Because a lot of them had never met someone who walked away from the left, who had believed in all of the things that I believe and made it out. Actually, the questions that I was asked were, like, how did you escape? You know, what did you believe? What is wokeness? And what can we do to fight against this ideology, this dangerous, detrimental ideology that is hurting the people who believe in it and society in general? I'm also very active on social media. If you guys are aware, I'm active on Twitter and TikTok, and I get asked these questions a lot as well to explain what wokeness is and how people can fight against it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share a bit of my story and hopefully answer these questions for you. In preparing for this talk and kind of trying to tackle this question, my first thought was to go really deep into the ideologies that make up wokeness, I guess. Kind of talking about critical theory and Marxism and social justice theory and all of these ideologies that are being pushed in society. But as I was preparing for it and kind of trying to tie it into my own story, I realized something. While I was woke, I didn't understand any of these ideas. I had never read Karl Marx. I had never heard of critical theory. I did not know any of these terms. What I was told was that wokeness was simply being aware of injustice. That there are all of these problems in the world that we can see. There's poverty, there's crime, and there's hunger, and if you are aware of these problems and you follow these specific ideas of how to solve them, then you are a good person. You are a good person because you're aware of these problems and because you have come to the correct conclusions of how to solve them. If you're not woke, it simply means you're a bad person. You either don't recognize the problems exist or you've come to the incorrect conclusions of how to solve them. So my first real introduction to wokeness was when I was really young. I grew up in a very diverse, and I'm using the word diverse very loosely here. That's diverse meaning racially diverse, culturally diverse, religiously diverse areas, but not very philosophically or politically diverse. It was still very left-leaning. Everyone that I knew around me was voting Democrat. I was born in New York. I lived in California, both blue areas of those states. Eventually, when I was 9, I moved to Texas. And moving to Texas was a bit of a culture shock for me and my family. Specifically, the area that I moved to was much more, I guess, homogenous, and it was overwhelmingly white, Christian, and conservative. And I went to a school that was overwhelmingly white, Christian, and conservative. I started school, 4th grade, in Texas in 2008. So that was right in the middle of an election, right? Barack Obama versus John McCain. And my school, in the first few months, we had a mock election where, all of us 4th graders would either vote for John McCain or Obama. We would see who won president for the class. Well, I was 9. I did not know anything about policies or politics. All I knew was that my parents and my community, the people who I went to church with, they all were going to vote for Obama. And me being 9, I just thought, okay, that means Obama's the good guy. Like, he's the correct politician to win, he's the good guy, and McCain is the bad guy. Well, I was the only one in my class who voted for Obama. Every single other person voted for John McCain. And I was very confused. Why would they vote for the bad guy? Why would they vote for the candidate that my parents weren't supporting? So I went home and I asked my parents, why is there a reason why people would vote for the other guy? And their response was, well, there has never been a black president in the history of the United States. And the reason that we wanted to support Barack Obama was because he would be the first black president. If the students who are in your class didn't vote for him, then it's either because they aren't aware of this injustice, that black people have been so oppressed that we've never had a black president, or they believe that a black person shouldn't be president, that black people can't or shouldn't have success in the country. That's the only reason why they would vote for McCain, would be because they're racist. But this didn't make sense to me, because while I had not been at this school for very long, all of my classmates were so nice to me. Well, not all of them, kids can be mean, but even the ones that I didn't necessarily get along with, it was not because of my race. If they had never said anything about my skin color, it was about something silly like, not sharing a juice box at lunch. But I was supposed to believe that they were racist, really without any proof. I didn't accept that. I didn't accept that all of my classmates were secretly racist. But it did plant a seed of paranoia. And I was more aware, more conscious of what they were saying, paying more attention to what they were doing, looking for racism, even if it wasn't there. And I thought that maybe I'd come to a solution to this problem as well, this problem that maybe my classmates were racist. If they didn't think that I could succeed because of my skin color, then I would just prove them wrong. I would do really well in school, and if I, got good grades and succeeded in what I wanted to do, then they wouldn't believe this anymore. So that's what I did. I did well in my classes, I studied hard, I got involved in extracurricular activities. I think my teachers really liked me. I was a teacher's pet. I would sit in the front and raise my hand and ask all the questions. That was me. And I had a good life. I was succeeding at school. I had good friends. I was a happy person. Then I got to high school. And the high school that I went to was a different school than the middle school that I went to. But it was in the same area, still majority white, Christian, conservative. The difference in my high school, though, was that my high school had a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. So if you don't know what diversity, equity, inclusion is, it's also called DEI. DEI programs are supposed to well, make the environments of the school more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. They are supposed to create activities and policies that help people who are considered minority groups succeed or feel more welcome. So one of the ways that my school's DEI program worked was we had affinity groups. Affinity groups are kind of like clubs where you meet, but not like an art club where you meet based off of like your love of art, or a music club where you meet based off of your love of music. You meet based off of your immutable characteristics. So your race, your sexual orientation, your sex. So, for example, my school had an affinity group for Black students, for Asian students, for there was an LGBT affinity group. There was one for international students, I believe, who, were born in other countries. And there was a group for allies, which I guess was everybody else, like 90% of my class. I don't know what they did in the ally group, I never went, but what we did in the Black/African-American group, as it was called, was we complained, or that's what we were supposed to do. Come together, sit at lunch for an hour once a month, and talk about how racist everyone was in the school. How everyone was committing these atrocious microaggressions and making it so difficult for all of the students who weren't white to succeed in the school. But again, this went against all of my experiences. I had never experienced racism from my classmates. I didn't see them as racist or preventing me from succeeding anyway. But I was supposed to sit there and just kind of listen to what everyone was saying, agree, nod along. Well, one time I went and I decided I wasn't going to do that. Instead of nodding along and agreeing that everyone was racist, I was going to speak out. And I said, I have friends who are all different colors and races. I've been at this school for a little while now. I've never had an issue where I couldn't do something because of my race. I don't think that's not my experience, at least. People looked at me like I had 5 heads. Like, they could not believe that I had the audacity to say that the school wasn't racist, even though that was my experience, at least. In fact, after this meeting, one of the upperclassmen came to me after the meeting and told me, you should not have said that. You should not have said that the school wasn't racist, because this affinity group is a safe space for people to share all of their terrible experiences. And if by you saying that you haven't experienced them, you are invalidating them. And if you invalidate them, then they won't feel comfortable complaining. So you can't talk about how you're having a good time at the school. After that, I decided not to go back to affinity groups anymore. For a few reasons. Well, one, I thought it was super counterproductive for us to be advocating for inclusion and separating people based on race, right? Like, that is so counterproductive to what it was supposed to be doing. But also, I wasn't gonna lie to people. I wasn't gonna sit there and pretend like my experiences weren't happening because other people didn't share them. That also seemed counterproductive to the idea of a safe space. So I continued going about my life, doing my thing for a few years, avoiding the DEI department as much as I could because they didn't really like me over there. And then 2016 rolled around, and I was a senior in college. Another major election year. Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, and so you know the way that my parents, my community kind of talked about people who voted for Obama, that they were racist? Yeah. When Trump ran, it was 1,000 times worse. I have a family member who believed that Trump was going to re-legalize slavery. I had friends and parents of friends who believed that he was going to bring or put gas chambers across the country and put anyone who wasn't white or straight into concentration camps like the Holocaust. I had a teacher who cried because she believed that he was going to take away women's rights as citizens and put them in baby birthing camps like The Handmaid's Tale. Now, I think that there are some legitimate, well, now in 2023, I think there's some legitimate criticisms of Donald Trump, his presidency, his policies, but obviously this was ridiculous. Like, anyone who had listened to him speak or knew anything about his policies knew this wasn't true. He was president for 4 years, this was not true. But back then, I didn't know anything about Donald Trump. I still wasn't really into politics. I had never heard him speak. I was just listening to the people around me, specifically the adults, who were talking about how terrible this man was and how our country was just going to be destroyed if he rose to power. And I became really scared. Scared for myself, for my own safety, scared for the safety of my friends and my family members, and scared because my classmates, some of them supported Trump. Some of them were coming to school with Make America Great Again hats on. They were coming to school with Trump 2016 stickers on their lockers, on their notebooks. Some of them even had American flags, just the symbol of hatred, apparently. And yeah, I was afraid. I was afraid, and I thought back to what I was told before, that, you know, all of my classmates were racist. I just wasn't aware. They were secretly racist. They secretly wanted, you know, bad things for me, but I wasn't aware of it because they weren't so open about it back in 2008. Well, now they were apparently open about it because they were supporting Trump. And Trump was evil, and Trump was racist. So now I had my proof that all of my classmates were actually wanting to hurt me. And I ran back to the DEI department, because no one over there supported Trump. And they believed that they had a plan to stop him, or at least to stop his ideas of hatred that they claimed he was pushing so far. So, like affinity groups, they were safe spaces that were supposed to be created for marginalized groups to share their experiences and be validated. What they wanted to do was to make the entire school a safe space. So, to make sure that people who were oppressed or people who were considered marginalized could speak and always have their opinions validated in a school where most people were white, Christian, conservative, considered too privileged to understand the experiences of the marginalized students in the school. So how they went about doing this was one activity that I was taught how to lead as part of my DEI training was an activity called the privilege walk. So what a privilege walk is everyone stands in a row, like this, and a moderator or someone has a list of privileges. If you can find your clothing size easily at a Target, you take a step forward. If Sephora carries your makeup shade, you take a step forward. And these privileges range from ridiculous to insanely ridiculous. But after all 60 privileges are read and everyone has taken as many steps forward as they're supposed to, you end up with this hierarchy of one person who's way at the front, who is considered the most privileged, and one person who's way back at the beginning, who is considered the least privileged. And the idea is that the more privilege that you have, the less your ideas matter, the less your perspective matters, the less your thoughts matter. Because if you have too much privilege, there's no way that you can be truly aware of all the injustices that are happening. Think about where you fall relative to them in the hierarchy. And that should determine how you interact with them and whether you validate their experiences or not. So I, unfortunately, really accepted this idea that this was how we could fight back against Donald Trump and the evil far right that was taking over. Because I hadn't really heard of another way. But I also knew that this idea of creating a safe space, it might work for a high school, but how would it work for the entire country? Like, there had to be more things to learn besides just privilege walks, because we can't have the entire US stand in a line and like step forward if they're a man, and that would be very hard to organize. So I decided that I was going to go somewhere where I could learn more about the tools and techniques that I could use to really fall into activism and fight back against, the evil far right and Donald Trump. I decided to go to school in Boston, Massachusetts, because it was the bluest city in one of the bluest states in the country. I knew that if I went there, and I went to this super blue area, I would be surrounded by Democrats and other people who were super progressive and left-leaning, or regressive, as Craig likes to say. It's a fly, I'm so sorry. And if I was surrounded by people who shared all the same views as me, then, well, one, I would learn all of these other techniques, hopefully, that I could use in my activism, but also I would be safe. I would be safe from the horrors of the Donald Trump presidency. Hopefully they wouldn't put a gas chamber in Boston. And I could create a safe, or the whole city really would be a safe space, because everyone believed in the same things. They all believed in the privilege hierarchy. They all knew that you had to, check yourself for your privilege constantly. So I had nothing to worry about with people who were privileged trying to invalidate my experiences in Boston. So my DEI program at my high school, it was pretty intense. It was nothing compared to the DEI indoctrination that I had to face at MIT. Did I say that? I went to Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Craig said that in his introduction. Their DEI program was very, very intense. When I came for orientation, we were given videos to watch that taught us how to avoid committing microaggressions, which, if I haven't defined that already, microaggressions are when you accidentally offend someone. So not like saying a slur or going out of your way to be rude, but when you say something and you say it with no malintent, but someone else is offended, that's a microaggression. So they taught us how to make sure that with everything that we said, we never offend anybody else. Because if we did offend somebody else, and we offended them to the point where they felt just so much distress at their offense, they could go to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Board, where the board could then punish the person who was offensive, and academically either suspend them or remove them from their housing, or punch them in some other way for committing hate speech or microaggression or whatever they determine had happened in that situation. Now, the reason that the DEI program was so intense, and the reason why they had this advisory board to remove dangerous and harmful language and students who were being offensive, was because what I learned when I was in Boston was that, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this before, words are violence. If you offend someone or you hurt somebody's feelings with your words, not only could it just hurt their feelings, but some people, it could lead to them harming themselves or ending their own life out of distress of your words. And so in order to keep people safe and to keep the students safe, we had to constantly watch our language, watch what we were saying, because if someone was to harm themselves or take their own life because of something that you said, their blood was on your hands. You were responsible for the harm that comes to them. So now in every situation that you go into, you have to, when you're talking to somebody else, you have to, one, check your privilege, remember where you are in the privilege hierarchy, watch all of your words, and make sure you don't say anything that could offend them. And even after the conversation is over, you are supposed to be paranoid that this person could go off and harm themselves because of something that you said. This does not lead to healthy relationships or healthy human interactions in general. It actually leads to a very lonely and isolating feeling when you don't feel like you can connect to someone because you're constantly hyper-analyzing every moment of the conversation, afraid that you're going to take the person's life that you're talking to. Despite this, despite the fact that after I learned all of these things and I started implementing them in my life, I was struggling with my own interpersonal relationships. I was feeling isolated. I was feeling like I couldn't make connections with people. I kept on advocating for it. I became an activist on campus. I was helping teach my fellow peers how to avoid offending people, how to use the correct language, how to avoid vision, and stop, people from killing themselves. So, towards the end of my freshman year, I got really, really sick. And some of this probably came from the stress that I was under of constantly being afraid of accidentally murdering people. But I ended up with pneumonia. It was really, really bad. I was super sick. I ended up in the hospital. After my pneumonia went away, I was still really sick. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I had to leave Boston and fly home to Texas and take a medical leave from school. When I got to Texas, I was moved from hospital to hospital because doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, and I was getting progressively worse, to the point where I was paralyzed on the left side of my body. Now, if you can see today, I am not paralyzed. And this is because they did eventually figure out I have an autoimmune disorder, a rare autoimmune disorder that attacks my nerves. So when your nerves are attacked, it's kind of hard to move your body parts. But while I was undergoing treatment and recovery in the hospital in Texas, it was a really long process. And while my parents wanted to stay with me and take care of me and help me through it, they had to go back to work and go back to their lives. I had a younger brother. My mom had to take care of him. He was still in high school. And my dad had to go back to work. I had hospital bills because I was in there for such a long time. And I realized while I was in the hospital, I was in a very vulnerable situation because I couldn't move half of my body. I was an 18-year-old girl, the youngest one in the adult ward of the hospital. And this is how people get taken advantage of by staff and by other people. If you're looking for someone who's vulnerable, this is where you're gonna go. And I realized, okay, I needed to optimize my safety. I needed to make sure that I have a female nurse who's taking care of me 24/7 and not a male nurse. But there was a problem with trying to optimize my safety. If I asked for a female nurse, I could potentially be offending someone. And if I offended someone, someone could die. So I'm sitting in the hospital trying to weigh these two options of, in one hand, I protect myself. I try to optimize my safety. I ask for a female nurse. But by doing this, I might accidentally offend someone and that person could go kill themselves. On the other hand, I don't ask for a female nurse. My safety is not a priority and maybe something happens, but at least I haven't harmed somebody else with my words. It was a really hard decision to make. And it might not sound like it, but I keep harping on this because I actually thought that I could kill someone. Eventually, I decided that I was going to go ahead and ask for a female nurse. And it was not an issue at all. Well, first of all, I was in Texas. So, like, the gender stuff was, and this was in 2018, the gender stuff was not a big deal there. When I asked for a female nurse, they all knew what I was talking about, and it was really easy. But I still felt like I had just done something terrible. Because, while, yeah, the situation went over okay, what if it hadn't? What if I had killed someone? I felt terrible. I had just risked the lives of the staff of the hospital. And I was supposed to be okay with that? Well, no, I wasn't. I was supposed to hate myself and beat myself up over this forever. At least that's what I believed according to my ideology. But this was where I started to kind of ask questions, like, should I really be having to weigh these two options of my safety versus the safety of other people? In what way should me asking a question mean other people are gonna die? Like, obviously this was fine, so why was I so nervous going into this in the first place when nobody got hurt? I had a lot of questions. A lot of questions about, well, one question being like, what is a woman? What is a female? Are these terms that I can use without hurting people? Is there a way to communicate these concepts without hurting people? But also trying to figure out where in my line of thinking I went wrong. Because what I had just experienced was something in my brain was not lining up with what I was seeing with my own eyes. And I realized that this disconnect happened. But any philosophy that is true should be applicable to real life, right? So why wasn't it? Why did this feel so difficult? And why was I not able to clearly understand what was going on in my own brain? So I went back to school in the fall of 2018, the first semester of my sophomore year, and I started asking questions. I started trying to understand more about what I believed, and why I believed it, and how it related to reality, and how it was applicable in these situations. And people did not take me asking questions very well. I had friends who stopped talking to me when I asked questions like, what is a woman? Can we communicate this concept of a biological female without somebody hurting themselves? I had people call me names. I got called a transphobe and a TERF and a Nazi. I was asked if I was listening to Fox News and listening to conspiracy theories. I had some people who were just very paranoid. They would go down to a whisper, why are you asking this? Is someone watching us? They were afraid that asking the wrong questions was going to get them in trouble. No one really interacted or took these questions seriously. No one really tried to answer them. There was a lot of just pushing them off to the side. And it made me wonder, if nobody else was questioning these ideas, my professors, my peers, my advisors, my mentors, it was just me. I'm the only one asking these questions, at least in my community or in my circle. What is the likelihood that I'm seeing something that no one else can see? What's the likelihood that I'm right and everyone that I'm going to school with and everyone in the city and everyone in my school is wrong? Or is it more likely that I'm the one who's crazy? There's something wrong with me for asking questions. Well, unfortunately, I decided the problem was me. I guess I figured at 19 I wasn't smart enough or understanding these ideas enough, and I just had to learn more about them and they would make sense. Because again, all of these smart people that I was around, these professors, the experts, they all accepted them and they weren't questioning these ideas, so that's what I should do, right? The problem was, once the cat was out of the bag, once my brain had started to turn and function and try to think through these ideas, I couldn't really turn it off. I couldn't pretend that I wasn't seeing these contradictions in my beliefs and reality. And it made me really, really depressed. Because every single day I was trying to fight to turn off my brain. Now, I know that this actually might sound crazy what I'm about to say, but I know that for a lot of people, COVID was like the worst time in their lives. And it was awful, right? The government shutting everything down and forcing everyone into their homes was terrible. But if I'm being honest, COVID saved my life. Because in 2020, I was forced out of the environment that I was in, away from the people who were pushing these ideas, and forced back to Texas, into my house, into like solitary confinement, where really the only thing there was to do was to think. And when I started to allow myself, well, it wasn't that I allowed myself, that would be giving myself a bit too much credit, but when I didn't have the distractions that I could use to shut off my brain and I let it run for a bit, just the number of inconsistencies in my thinking just became so obvious. And I started to maybe think that maybe I was onto something, maybe there was something wrong with the way that I was thinking, the way that I was accepting these ideas without questioning them, the way that I was going along with what everyone else was saying because they were my professors or because they were my peers. I had this conversation during quarantine with my brother, and he had visited Boston for a little bit. And we were talking about something completely unrelated to politics or philosophy, and he was talking about like anime or something. And just in the middle of the conversation, he said, people in Boston are insane. Like, if you ask them these basic questions like define the word woman, they can't do it. Like, they think that you should just accept this and not question it. How crazy is that? My brother is not a Nazi. My brother is actually extremely apolitical. He does not keep track of politics, culture, war stuff. But even he noticed there was something wrong. That there was this craziness happening in Boston. And having this conversation with him, it was the reassurance that I needed that I was on the right track. Because maybe I wasn't insane. I mean, maybe we were both insane. But that was unlikely. Like, we had not coordinated this conversation. So, if he wasn't insane, and I wasn't insane, then maybe I could, at least a little bit, trust my brain to think through his issues. I could try to think through them and figure out, what was true and what was false, and try to put the pieces together of my philosophy and think for myself a little bit more. Now, as I was going through this process of thinking for myself and trying to figure out what was real, all throughout 2020, there are a lot of stories I can share. There's crazy stuff that happened in 2020. I'm going to just share a few. So, this was the pandemic, it was COVID. As I shared earlier, I have an autoimmune disorder. So, COVID was a really scary time for me. Because there was this virus going around and no one knew where it came from or, what the symptoms were, how it was presenting in people, and I was in a high-risk category. But I knew how to take care of my health. I've been doing it for years at this point. I wear masks when other people are sick. I tend to wear masks during flu season to keep myself safe. I know how to asked to stay home or work remotely if I need to because of my health conditions. I know what medications I can and can't take because certain medications will cause issues with the autoimmune disorder. I was ready to take care of myself. The government said no. Boston implemented mask mandates where in some places you would get fined if you were not only in a private building without a mask or a public building without a mask, if you were outside without a mask. If you were outside with no one around you without a mask, you could be fined. In some places, you could be arrested. Because of these mask mandates, everyone went out and bought masks. So the prices of masks went up crazy high. And someone like me, who needed masks, suddenly couldn't get masks. Vaccine mandates. They brought out this vaccine, and like I said, there are some vaccines and medications that I can't take, but I had to take them anyways, because if I didn't, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't leave my house without the vaccine passport. When all the businesses got shut down, and I was the type of person who would have benefited from being able to order from Uber Eats or order food to my apartment because I was working remotely. Well, all the businesses were shut down, so I couldn't get food. I actually had to leave my apartment and go to the grocery store, which actually made a higher risk of getting COVID because I had to leave. And the grocery stores were out of food because everyone had run and grabbed all the food, and all of the suppliers, some of them were closed. It was a mess, right? The government had made it so much more difficult for me than if I had just taken care of myself. And I talked to some of my friends about this, about how I was not supportive of the way that COVID was being handled. And their response was, you must be listening to right-wing Fox News conspiracy theories. Why would you question this? The experts are saying that this is what you need to do. So you need to go along with it. Don't use your brain, don't think. Just accept it. This is the morally correct thing to do. A few months later, Black Lives Matter movement and the protests and riots that sparked all over the country. I had a friend that was living in Chicago, and she could not leave her apartment because outside of her building, the businesses were all on fire, and they were being blown up. I was a bit critical, a bit is an understatement. I was very critical, specifically of the looting and property damage that was happening during this time. And I thought that maybe I would have a little bit of defense against criticism because melanin. But no, that actually didn't stop anyone from saying the exact same things. When I disagreed with the Black Lives Matter protests, I was listening to Fox News conspiracy theories, I was being a bigot, the experts said that this was the right thing to do and I was supposed to accept it, even if it didn't make sense. Towards the end of 2020, I started getting really bored because of all of the alone time I had being in isolation, and I started watching Netflix documentaries. One specific one that I was watching was on cults, specifically Scientology, but also cults in general. And I was watching this documentary, and I was seeing the ways that cults keep people isolated, brainwash them into believing things that aren't true, tell them that if you go against the cult, bad things are going to happen to you or bad things are going to happen to other people. I realized, or at least I was able to answer at that moment, what wokeness was. So I said I was going to answer what is wokeness in this talk. Wokeness is a cult. It's a cult that brainwashes people into believing that, well, first off, there are only two options. Either you are a Nazi, right-wing,
white supremacist bigot who wants people to die and wants concentration camps put up all over the US, or you are good and you are moral and you are on the left, and therefore you support everything that comes out of the left, even if it doesn't make sense, because it's the morally correct thing to do. And you have to follow it even if you don't understand it, because if you don't, people will die. And I've talked about the obvious issues with this way of thinking. Right? It creates a lot of paranoia and isolation. It harms your interpersonal relationships. It also creates mental chaos because you're constantly having to fight between what you're supposed to believe is moral and what you're seeing in front of your eyes. So, what can we do about this? Because obviously, this has caused a lot of chaos and problems in our country. Again, not just with interpersonal, but on the policy level, people are supporting policies if they don't understand them or they don't understand the implications of them. Well, first, we have to address an unfortunate and frustrating truth. There are some people whose minds will never be changed. There are some people who are so deeply indoctrinated and so unwilling to think that there is no argument and nothing that you could say that will change their mind. However, there are also people who can. There are a lot of people, and I actually think that this is most people, who are going along with this because they think that it's maybe the lesser of two evils. They think that they don't want to be right and are on the right, but the left is slightly better in their eyes. They don't actually agree with things coming out of it, or they have doubts, or they have questions. But a lot of these people feel like they're the only ones. They feel like they're alone. So something that you can do, something that I try to do, is to talk to people. Don't be afraid to have conversations, even if this person comes across as super woke. And I think about when my brother and I had that conversation that we had in 2020. That was just the nudge that I needed to start myself on my own political journey, the political and philosophical journey, and to start asking the right questions and just reassurance that, I wasn't going crazy for doubting what I was told. If you have conversations with people, encourage them to use their own mind. It's okay to think. This is something that it was hard to come to terms with, but it's such an important and freeing thing to accept. And these ideas, they don't uphold under scrutiny. Like, once you think about them for more than 5 seconds, they're done. You can't cohesively continue to believe in any of this once you start to activate your brain. And if you meet someone who's active-minded, if you've met someone who's activated their brain, maybe they don't know where to go next. Because, again, this idea of only left and right is just so pervasive in our culture and our society. And I've talked about the left a lot and how much they have contributed to this issue, but the right is oftentimes no better. They also perpetuate this idea that you're either agree with everything coming out of the Republican Party, or you are a Bernie Sanders supporting communist who believes that, misgendering means death. And it's not these two options. There are so many other ways of thinking out there, and a lot of people just don't know that they exist. So you can introduce them to different ways of thinking. You can bring them to level up. And the point of this talk is not just to say level up is the solution, or OSI is the solution, or even that I have all of the solutions. If you take away one thing from this talk, it's that while things look really bad, there's hope. when I think about back where I started and how indoctrinated I was and where I am today, and how many other people there are out there who are on their own journeys and who could potentially be here with us next year at Level Up, it reminds me that things aren't as bad as they seem. And you can't force people to change their minds. But by being active-minded, by leading by example, and by being brave enough to speak out, you can reassure someone who's on their own journey and help them get from there to here. And if we change just a few minds at a time, it creates a ripple effect. And that's how you change culture, and that's how you change society. Thank you.
I do have a lot of friends within this and a lot of empathy for a lot of people within this, and I was wondering, how do you suggest combating the immediate emotional response that most people have because of the "if you're not with us, you're against us" mentality, based on fear and immediately thinking like, oh, if you don't agree with me, you want what's worse for me. Because I have very close friends who, when trying to have a discussion about like, oh, protect women's sports and such, it is the immediate knee-jerk reaction is genuine fear that they have been caused to believe is warranted, because like that means that you must want terrible things for them. How do you try to come at that fear knee-jerk response? So like I said before, there are some people where I think no matter how you come about it, they're going to react poorly, and there's not much you can do about it. But I think that the best situation that you can put yourself in, well, one, don't match their emotion, stay calm. I see a lot of people where they'll end up in these situations and someone goes, well, you know, you're a Nazi and you're a bigot, and they're like, but you're brainwashed and blah, blah, and it just turns into a screaming fight where, you know, no ideas are actually being shared and everyone's just screaming at each other. I think making sure you stay calm, and yeah, I mean, knowing you and your temperament, like, just stay rational and say, no, I'm not trying to hurt you. Maybe you can try to explain it, while staying calm. I think this is one of the most interesting things that I see a lot is when I look online, I see other people who have these debates with people who are on the far left, and you'll see the person on the far left is like screaming and crying, and if the other person remains calm, then like there's a very obvious difference in where they're coming from and how they're approaching problems. And even that, just staying calm, it might help them to reflect on why they're acting or behaving or thinking this way. Yeah, I think staying calm, staying rational, not matching the energy, you're not going to name calm, like kind of down the middle. Yeah, I think that just leading by the example is probably the best way to do it. I also have friends who are still in this. I haven't had a lot of deep conversations with many of them because a lot of them, we kind of avoid them if they're still talking to me from that time. But it can be hard, but I think, yeah, just staying calm and, yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for the powerful, inspiring testimonial. I really appreciate it. Let me start by saying I have a lot of friends who are more on the left side, like crazy stuff like anarcho-communists, anarcho-syndicalists, like actual communists, and all that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We know that people like just operate mostly on emotions or rational arguments, right? You can just divide it into these two groups. So let's assume we have a person on the far left that is pretty rational, right? So what would be the actual areas when our values overlaps, like some concepts that you would refer to starting a conversation, like some middle common ground, let's say, that you can actually have a conversation with that person on the left side that's kind of rational?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where to start with overlapping? I think There used to be this phrase that I used to hear a lot, which is that like a lot of people recognize the problems, they just don't recognize the solutions. And I think that while there are some problems that they kind of made up that aren't real, there are some issues that are. Like, I don't think that anyone here would say that like crime is the problem or like poverty is the problem. And so I think starting with this like, hey, we both address or we both recognize that this is an issue, but you know the solutions maybe are different. Maybe we can talk about those solutions and see where we have some common ground, and in those differences, why we have those differences. And I think that that helps. You know, this. I'm not trying to hurt you, or I don't think that poverty is a good thing. I'm coming across this in a different way. Yeah.
Hey, awesome talk. Loved it. I first heard about privilege walks, I think like back in 2014. I've had the benefit of never having to do one, thank goodness. But yeah, definitely something that's been known to me for quite some time, maybe a decade, right? I'm wondering, is there anything else you've had to do throughout your journey in this whole, woke, whatever journey, right? Anything else similar to the privilege walks that you've had to do?
Similar to the privilege walks. So yes. I'm trying to think of exactly when this happened, but there was a situation that I was in where people had to write their identities on like a name tag. So it's like your name, and then you wrote like your sexual orientation, your racial identity, your gender identity, and all of it on the name tag, and it was supposed to be to help people know like who they were supposed to feel comfortable with based on those characteristics. I don't remember where this was. I don't think this was in a class at school, but it might have been in one of my extracurriculars. I think that's one of the only things similar to like the privilege walk, as far as the really highlighting the privilege in an activity. Other kind of crazy things I had to do, land acknowledgements. I don't know if that's comparable to the privilege walks, but okay, yeah. So going into, at the beginning of like all of our classes, each semester we would do an acknowledgement of the land that we were on and what tribe, Native American tribe was there before us, and then we were supposed to feel bad, I guess, about the fact that we were like learning chemistry on the land of this tribe, but then also not do anything about it, just talk about it. I had a class where, I didn't do this. I had a class where we had to publicly talk about our identities and how it made us feel oppressed. My teacher was biracial. She was half black, half white, and she cried because she believed that the black half of her was being oppressed by the white half of her. And she couldn't come to terms with the mixing of blood in her body. And then we all had to go through a similar thing and talk about how our intersectional identities were like causing us distress. Yeah, those are some of the things that I
Thank you for the talk. It was great. So I'm part of the Ladies of Liberty Alliance. It's a chapter-based organization that is promoting the ideas of liberty for women. And I lead the chapter in Canada. One of her members, she was so woke and left-leaning that she was also boycotting the talks and lectures of Jordan Peterson in the University of Toronto, like that extreme left. So COVID happened. She realized that like a lot of the craziness that the Canadian government was doing, that's why we ended up with the trucker of freedom convoy and all that. And something that she started to realize, just similar to your journey, is that her friends didn't want to be her friends anymore. Her friends were treating her like she was crazy, like she was now a right-wing extremist. So my question is, how did you deal with that? Because no one wants to be a social pariah among her circle of friends, right? So where did you get that inner strength in order to overcome this?
if I'm being 100% honest, the rest of my college career or my college experience was remote after COVID. So my number of social interactions decreased dramatically. I think that during that time, it was a lot easier because I wasn't around people to find that strength and become comfortable with myself. I also was not very vocal about this when I was in school, which looking back, I regret in some ways. I have only really been vocal more recently on social media. Like I started my Twitter a year ago, and that was kind of my first time being public about a lot of my views. But when I first started losing friends and I was asking questions, it was really hard. And I think now how I deal with it is, well, I've made new friends. New friends who aren't going to, run me out of town because my views. I don't know if I quite have advice on this. I think try to surround yourself with new people who can support her, and to understand that if someone doesn't like you for who you are, then they're not really your friend. And that relationship, as hard as it can be to accept that, it's probably not one that you want to be in, or one that's good for you, if you have to pretend to be someone else, or if you're afraid they're going to run out of town for your views.
Hi, thank you for sharing your story. It was really wonderful to hear, and I think most of us can relate at least to some point. So basically, to keep my question brief, is like, where do you feel the limits of offense as a concept lie? Because my feeling, and I'm reading a lot about this, is that there's literally no limit. Anyone can find anything offensive. Like what I'm just saying, somebody can find it offensive now. So when people try to instruct other people not to be offensive, my conclusion is that they're teaching them not to think. Because Barry Weiss yesterday said that free speech relates directly to free thought. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
I agree. I think that when you teach people that, offensiveness, especially, let me start. I think that intent matters when you talk to people, right? Like, it's one thing if I come up to you and I'm trying to insult you and I'm purposefully trying to, be mean, then yeah, like, you're probably going to be upset. And I think that that's totally normal and natural if I'm trying to hurt you. But I think that when we talk about offensiveness, in this way, like this accidental offensiveness, or this, you can say something and have no malintent, and if someone else takes it poorly, that's something that's wrong with you. I think it's actually on the other person. Like, I think that if you're choosing to be upset, even if you know the other person has no malintent, then that's not their fault. That's your fault for choosing to be offended in that moment. I do. I think that there are a lot of people who choose to be offended by things when there's no reason to be. That the person has maybe made a mistake or said something that, is completely harmless, but you're looking for a reason to be offended. I think that's bad. Yeah.
First of all, I am very nervous also. But your talk was wonderful. And I chose to come to it because I saw the word woke. It kind of triggered me. I'm not going to die. But I'm from Utah. In Utah, you kind of need to be a Democrat, a left wing, because the Democrats are the ones standing up for women's rights, for LGBT rights, LGBTQ. Anyway, when I hear like Ron DeSantis saying this is where woke goes to die, I feel negative emotions about that, because I feel like he is saying we shouldn't teach our children anything that's going to offend them. We shouldn't teach them about slavery. We should ban books by Black writers. And that seems like the definition of woke, from what you're saying, sort of. So I've been very confused about it. Do you feel like we should be teaching everything we can teach about our America's history that's negative?
I don't know, just do you have any more things that can help me sort this out?
Yeah, so I do think that we should teach history. I think that it's important that when we teach history and things, we teach it objectively, which I think means including all of the information and all perspectives on it. I think one of the issues with the way that it's taught, in the way that I was taught history in a kind of a woke environment, was that it was only one side of our perspective, and I was taught that I think that it's bad to teach slavery and say that all white people are bad because slavery, right? And that was kind of the way that I was taught growing up, was slavery happened, and therefore all white people today are responsible and they are bad, and if you hate white people because of slavery happened, you are justified in your feelings. I think that that's wrong. Now, I think that if someone is saying, we shouldn't teach slavery at all, that's also bad. But I think that there needs to be, history needs to be taught in the way of how it actually happened, or if there's going to be different perspectives on what happened or how different events are interpreted, then all of those different interpretations should be shared, and students should be encouraged to think through them and to critically think through all the different perspectives. I do think that Ron DeSantis' Stop the Woke Act, there are some parts of it that I think are eliminating some of that left-leaning bias, some of the stuff that I experienced when I was taught history of things. But I think that he is trying to, in some cases, prevent certain perspectives from being taught. One of the things was he has tried to pass a bill preventing certain majors from being taught in colleges. And I think that that's wrong. Like, adults have brains, we should be able to use them and decide for ourselves whether a woke major is, good or bad. I think that it's just that these ideas should be. I think wokeness is crazy, and I think that when we put logic next to it, it doesn't hold up. So instead of trying to completely eliminate wokeness from being taught, we should be putting it next to logic and letting people come to their own conclusion that logic is better.
I feel better now that someone else has said that as well. My question is, I'm from the UK, and I went to an all-girls secondary school, and then I moved to an all-boys secondary school in the mixed system. And I was the only girl in my economics class, and at points I was being physically harassed where someone hit me and it was like, you can't do that, she's a woman, and then someone would be like, no, she's just an object, it doesn't matter. But the way that I dealt with that was I felt like wokeness was a way to recognise me as an individual rather than just I'm a woman, as a person as well. So my question was, do you feel like the woke movement can help deal with viewing people as individuals when other people view you by your immutable characteristics?
No. I think that, I don't know what happened to, first of all, I'm so sorry, that sounds awful. But I think that,
As long as you need to
yeah, sorry, collecting my thoughts. And this is where I think that, I don't think the conservative movement, sometimes, oftentimes, is an alternative to wokeness. Because what the conservative movement has done is, like I said, they at times don't view women as people. I've seen this with some of these conservative red-pilled men who all women together and say that they're bad and say that they deserve to be harassed and stuff. But I think that when wokeness approaches this issue, it's not from an individualist perspective. It's still from a collectivist perspective, right? Because if I was in my university, if you had come in and told your story, and I would say, well, maybe that wasn't my experience, I never had to go through this, I wouldn't have been allowed to disagree, because I would have been told, well, because I'm a woman and you're a woman, we have to both have these experiences or to agree on these experiences, where I think that an individualist perspective
which I don't think that wokeness supports, would be you have your experiences and I have my experiences and I can be empathetic towards your experiences and you can understand that, our experiences are different and that what happened to you was bad, but not by collectivizing us into these groups. I don't think that's the approach that wokeness takes when solving these issues or addressing them.
I was just going to ask, what do you think are the main factors that are leading to these illogical ideas and trends in society, such as which you mentioned?
Great question. Also, that's kind of really cool. Really just far away. So the main trends. We talked about this a little bit on the panel the other day. I think that the main ideas are kind of things from one, that you have to accept ideas that you even if you don't understand them, that you need to kind of sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of the movement, and that there is this morality or this subjective morality that comes above truth. And I think that the main factor that are pushing this, I'm still kind of working through my theory as to exactly how it's become so popular. I think that the way the education system is right now is really an issue. I was indoctrinated in school. A lot of public schools are teaching kids this, and that's one way that's spreading really fast. Right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you. I'm quite interested insofar as, do you think this is just an epidemic of very poor mental health? So I don't think the people who cry because they're half white, half black, followers of Adorno or Horkheimer or really reading into the Frankfurt School or Freud or Marx. Do you think it is just a case of widespread public psychosis, schizophrenia, and in many ways it's not an ideological battle, but more of a mental health battle that seems to have taken place across the country?
So I think that the mental health issues are being caused by that philosophy. I don't think that the mental health issues are coming first. I think that, I guess before, when you're being taught that, you're going to kill someone if you accidentally offend them, that's going to lead to a really poor mental health. And I think that, believing in these things, for me, my mental health was terrible when I was going through this. As soon as I came out, my mental health was much better. It wasn't that I was crazy, and then I accepted the ideas. The craziness came from the ideas. With the ideas, we're all craziness would go. So I think that it is more of a philosophical issue than an issue where we can medicate most of the population because they're experiencing